My true story from Georgia. My son said I was just taking up space, so I gave his space to his brother. The words hit harder than the July heat beating down on our front porch. But what he didn't know was that I'd already decided who deserved that space. And it wasn't him. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was watering the gardenias. The shrill ring cut through the humid Atlanta air like a knife through butter. I set down the hose and wiped my hands on my apron before answering. "Mama, we need to talk." It was Brandon, my eldest son. His voice carried that edge I'd grown to recognize over the past few years. The tone he used when he was about to ask for something he had no right to expect. "About what, honey?" "About this house. About you rattling around in all that space like some ghost nobody wants to see." I felt my grip tighten on the phone. The gardenias seemed to wilt a little in the morning sun, as if they too had heard the cruelty in his words. "Excuse me? Look, Mama, let's be real here. You're 73 years old. You're just taking up space in that big old house. It's wasteful, impractical, and frankly, it's time you faced facts about what you can and can't handle anymore." The house he was referring to had been in our family for 42 years. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, wraparound porch, and enough land to grow vegetables and flowers to my heart's content. My late husband Thomas had saved every penny to buy it when Brandon was just 6 years old. It was where we'd raised our boys, where we'd celebrated every Christmas, every birthday, every milestone that mattered. "Brandon, this is my home. It was your home when Dad was alive. Now, it's just an expense. A burden. You spend more on utilities and upkeep than most people make in a month. And for what? So you can play house in rooms you never even use." I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard where Thomas had built a swing set 30 years ago, where our younger son, Marcus, had scraped his knee learning to ride his bicycle, where we'd buried 3 different family dogs over the years, each one mourned like a member of the family. "What exactly are you suggesting, Brandon?" "I'm suggesting you move into one of those nice senior communities. Something manageable. Something appropriate for someone your age. There's a lovely place called Sunset Manor about 20 minutes from my house. They have activities, meal plans, and medical staff on site. You'd have everything you need." "And what happens to this house?" The pause was telling. Too long, too calculated. "Well, since you're asking, Lisa and I have been thinking it might be the perfect place to raise the kids. The schools in this district are excellent, and we've outgrown our current place. It would be keeping the house in the family." There it was, the real reason for the call. Brandon and his wife Lisa wanted my house. They wanted me out so they could move in, and they were dressing it up as concern for my well-being. "Have you discussed this with Marcus?" Another pause. "Marcus doesn't understand the practical realities of the situation. He's always been sentimental about things that don't matter anymore." Marcus was my younger son, 38 to Brandon's 42. Where Brandon had grown hard and calculating over the years, Marcus had remained gentle, thoughtful. He was a high school English teacher who lived in a modest apartment across town, never married, devoted to his students and to checking on me twice a week without fail. "Things that don't matter," I repeated. "Mama, you know what I mean." Marcus lives in the past. He thinks everything should stay exactly the same, forever. But that's not how life works. People move on. Situations change. You can't hold on to something just because it makes you feel nostalgic. I sat down heavily in the kitchen chair, where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 4 decades. The same chair where Thomas used to read me the funny parts of the newspaper while I cooked eggs and bacon. The same chair where I'd helped both boys with homework, where I'd listened to their dreams and fears and everything in between. "I need to think about this, Brandon." "What's to think about?" "I'm offering you a solution. A good solution. You get a comfortable place to live with everything taken care of, and the house gets the attention it deserves. It's a win-win, and if I say no, His voice hardened. Then you say no. But don't expect me to keep worrying about you rattling around in that big empty house when something happens. Don't expect me to keep pretending this arrangement makes sense when it clearly doesn't. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. If I didn't agree to his plan, I'd be on my own. No more occasional visits, no more help with heavy lifting or minor repairs. He was essentially blackmailing me with his absence, as if his sporadic attention was some great gift I couldn't afford to lose. I'll call you back, Brandon. When? When I'm ready. I hung up before he could respond, and sat in the silence of my kitchen. The morning light streamed through the curtains. Thomas and I had picked out together 15 years ago. Everything in this house told a story, held a memory, represented a piece of the life we'd built together. Brandon saw it as wasted space. I saw it as home. The truth was, I had been feeling the weight of the house lately, not because I was too old or incapable, but because it felt different without Thomas, quieter, lonelier. But the solution wasn't to abandon it. The solution was to fill it with life again, with the people who understood what it meant. I thought about Marcus, who still brought me flowers from his school's garden, who still called every Sunday to check on me, who still remembered that I liked my coffee with cream and sugar, and that I got nervous during thunderstorms. Marcus, who had never once suggested I was taking up too much space anywhere. The more I thought about Brandon's words, the angrier I became. Not just at what he'd said, but at the calculated way he'd said it. This wasn't a sudden concern for my welfare. This was a plan he and Lisa had been discussing for months. Maybe longer. They'd probably driven by the house, measuring rooms in their minds, deciding which of their children would get which bedroom. I picked up the phone and dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. Hey, Mama. How are you this morning? I'm fine, sweetheart. Are you busy today? Never too busy for you. What's going on? Could you come by for lunch? I'd like to talk to you about something. Of course. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. Marcus arrived at noon with a bouquet of sunflowers from the farmer's market and a loaf of fresh bread from the bakery downtown. He was tall like his father had been, with kind eyes and a smile that could light up a room. Where Brandon had inherited Thomas's business sense, Marcus had inherited his heart. These are beautiful, I said, arranging the sunflowers in the vase that had been a wedding gift from my mother. They reminded me of you. Always turning toward the light. We sat on the back porch with glasses of sweet tea, the way we had countless times before. The afternoon heat was building, but the old oak tree provided enough shade to make it comfortable. I could hear the neighbor's dog barking in the distance, and the sound of children playing in someone's pool. Marcus, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think I'm taking up too much space in this house? He set down his glass and looked at me with surprise. What kind of question is that? The kind your brother asked me this morning. Marcus's expression shifted from surprise to anger. Brandon said that to you? I told him about the phone call, about Brandon's suggestion that I move to Sunset Manor, about his plans to move his family into my house. With each detail, Marcus's jaw grew tighter. He had no right to say that to you. He thinks he's being practical. He's being selfish. This is your home, Mama. You raised us here. You and Dad built your whole life here. Just because he wants something doesn't mean he gets to make you feel guilty for having it. He made it sound like I was being unreasonable. Like holding on to this house was somehow unfair to everyone else. Marcus stood up and paced to the edge of the porch. You know what's unfair? The fact that he thinks he can waltz in here and redesign your life to suit his convenience. The fact that he thinks your feelings don't matter as long as he gets what he wants. He's not entirely wrong, though. The house is big for one person. The utilities are expensive. The upkeep is a lot for someone my age. So what? It's your house. If you want to live in every room or just one, that's your choice. If you want to heat the whole place or just the kitchen, that's your choice too. Since when does Brandon get to decide what's appropriate for your life? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I watched a cardinal land on the bird feeder Thomas had built. Bright red against the green leaves, beautiful and defiant. He said you wouldn't understand the practical realities. The practical reality is that you're perfectly capable of making your own decisions. The practical reality is that this house represents 40 years of your life, and no one has the right to pressure you into giving that up. But what if he's right about one thing? What if I am just rattling around in here like a ghost? Marcus came back and sat beside me, taking my hand in his. Mama, you're not a ghost. You're a woman who's lived a full life and deserves to enjoy the fruits of that life. However you see fit. This house isn't too big for you. It's exactly the right size for someone who's earned the right to have space. Space for what? Space for whatever you want. Space to remember. Space to create new memories. Space to breathe without someone telling you you're taking up too much room. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the cardinal peck at the seeds. The afternoon stretched on, lazy and warm, filled with the sounds of summer in Georgia. This was what Brandon wanted to take away from me. Not just the house, but moments like this, conversations like this, the freedom to sit on my own porch and watch birds without justifying my presence to anyone. Marcus, can I tell you something? Of course. Your brother called because he and Lisa want this house. Not because he's worried about me, but because they want what I have. And instead of asking honestly, he tried to make me feel like I was being selfish for not just handing it over. I know. You know? I've known for months. Lisa's been making comments at family gatherings about how wasteful it is for you to live here alone, about how the house would be perfect for their family. She's not subtle. Why didn't you tell me? Because I hoped Brandon would come to his senses. I hoped he'd remember that this is your home, not his inheritance to claim whenever it's convenient. And now, Marcus looked at me with the same protective expression he'd worn as a child when neighborhood bullies picked on smaller kids. Now I think it's time Brandon learned that manipulation has consequences. What do you mean? I mean that if he wants to treat you like you're taking up space that doesn't belong to you, maybe it's time to show him what it feels like to lose the space he thinks he's entitled to. The idea began forming in my mind even as Marcus spoke. Brandon had made his choice. He'd chosen to see me as an obstacle rather than his mother. He'd chosen to use guilt and emotional manipulation rather than honesty and respect. He'd chosen to prioritize his wants over my well-being. Maybe it was time I made some choices of my own. Tell me more, I said. Marcus smiled. And for the first time all day I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Well, the way I see it, if Brandon thinks you're taking up too much space, the solution isn't to make you smaller. The solution is to give your space to someone who appreciates it. Someone like you? Someone like me. That evening, after Marcus left, I sat in Thomas's old recliner and thought about the conversation. The house felt different somehow, not empty but full of possibility. For months, I'd been feeling like I was just maintaining this place, keeping it from falling apart while waiting for what? For Brandon to care, for time to make the decision for me. Now I realized I'd been thinking about it all wrong. This wasn't about maintaining anything. This was about living, about choosing who deserved to share in the life Thomas and I had built here. Brandon saw square footage and utility bills. Marcus saw Sunday dinners and holiday mornings and a place where love had taken root and grown strong. The choice seemed obvious when I put it like that. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. Harold Whitman had been our family lawyer for 23 years. He'd handled Thomas's business contracts, drawn up our wills, and helped us navigate the legal complexities of buying the house back in 1982. His office smelled like leather and old books, with mahogany shelves lined with legal volumes that looked like they'd been there since the Civil War. Martha, he said, rising from behind his massive desk as I entered. What brings you by today? I settled into the familiar chair across from him, the same one I'd sat in when Thomas and I had first discussed estate planning. I need to understand my options, Harold. About the house. His bushy eyebrows rose slightly. Harold had known our family long enough to read between the lines. Has something happened? Brandon wants me to sell and move into a senior facility. He's made it clear that if I don't, I'll be on my own. Harold leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. And what do you want to do? I want to make sure that if anything happens to me, the house goes to someone who will love it the way Thomas and I did. Someone who won't see it as just an asset to be liquidated. You're thinking about Marcus. I'm thinking about fairness. About making sure my legacy goes to the son who's earned it. Harold pulled out a thick file folder with my name written in his careful script. Let's review your current situation. The house is in your name solely, correct? Thomas transferred everything to you before he passed. That's right. And your will currently splits everything equally between Brandon and Marcus. It does, but Harold, I want to change that. He nodded slowly, making notes on a legal pad. That's entirely within your rights, Martha. But I want to make sure you've thought this through completely. Family disputes over inheritance can get ugly very quickly. It's already ugly. Harold, Brandon threatened to cut me off if I don't give him what he wants. How much uglier can it get? You'd be surprised. He set down his pen and looked at me seriously. But before we talk about changing your will, let me suggest something else. Something that might accomplish what you want while you're still alive to see it happen. What do you mean? A living trust. You transfer ownership of the house to a trust, with yourself as the trustee and beneficiary for life. You maintain complete control while you're alive, but you designate who inherits when you pass. The advantage is that it's much harder to contest than a will, and it keeps the property out of probate. The idea intrigued me. Go on. Even better, you could establish what's called a revocable living trust, with specific conditions. For instance, you could transfer ownership to Marcus now, but retain the right to live in the house for the rest of your life. That way, Brandon couldn't pressure you to sell because you wouldn't own it anymore. But I'd still live there. Absolutely, nothing would change in your day-to-day life. But legally, the house would belong to Marcus. Brandon would have no claim to it whatsoever. The beauty of the plan began to dawn on me. So when Brandon comes back with more pressure, you could honestly tell him that it's not your house to sell anymore. Harold spent the next hour explaining the legal details, the paperwork involved, and the timeline for making it happen. It would take about 2 weeks to prepare all the documents and get everything notarized and filed properly. There is one thing to consider, Martha, Harold said as we wrapped up. Once you do this, Brandon is going to know exactly where he stands. There won't be any ambiguity about your feelings toward his behavior. Good, I said firmly. It's time he learned that actions have consequences. That evening, I called Marcus and asked him to come by again. When he arrived, I was in the kitchen making his favorite chocolate chip cookies, the smell filling the house with warmth and comfort. You're up to something, he said, settling at the kitchen table. You only make these when you're planning something big. Smart boy. I always said you were the observant one. So what's the plan? I told him about my meeting with Harold, about the living trust, about my decision to transfer the house to him. Marcus's reaction wasn't what I expected. Mama, I can't accept that. Why not? Because it's too much. The house is worth over $400,000. I could never afford to maintain it properly, and I don't want you to feel like you have to take care of me financially. Marcus, honey, you're missing the point. This isn't about money. This is about making sure the house goes to someone who understands what it represents. But Brandon is your son too. Despite what he said, despite how he's acting, he's still family. I pulled the cookies from the oven and set them on the cooling rack. Brandon made his choice when he decided I was taking up too much space. When he chose to see me as an obstacle instead of his mother, I'm making mine. Have you thought about what this will do to our family? Brandon will never forgive either of us. Brandon hasn't forgiven us for existing. Marcus. He resents that I'm still alive and living in his house. He resents that you're close to me when he's not. This isn't about forgiveness. This is about respect. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, absently nibbling on a warm cookie. What if there was another way? What if we tried talking to him first? What would you say? I don't know. Maybe explain how his words affected you. Maybe help him understand the house means more to you than just shelter. And you think that would work? I think it's worth trying before we do something this drastic. I appreciated Marcus's compassionate nature, but I'd lived long enough to know when someone's mind was made up. Brandon didn't want understanding or compromise. He wanted compliance. All right, I said finally. We'll try it your way first. But if he doesn't listen, if he continues to treat me like an inconvenience he needs to manage, then we proceed with the trust. Deal. Marcus called Brandon that night and suggested they all meet for dinner on Saturday. Family discussion, he called it. A chance to clear the air and find a solution that worked for everyone. Brandon agreed, probably thinking he'd have Marcus as an ally in convincing me to be reasonable. Saturday arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that made Georgia summers legendary. I spent the morning in the garden tending to the tomatoes and picking fresh herbs for dinner. Physical work had always helped me think clearly, and I wanted to be prepared for whatever Brandon might throw at me. Marcus arrived early to help with cooking. We made Thomas's favorite meal, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with bacon, and cornbread that could make grown men weep. If we were going to have a difficult conversation, at least we'd have it over good food. Brandon and Lisa arrived at 6 o'clock sharp. Lisa was perfectly put together as always, her blonde hair styled in an expensive cut, her sundress probably costing more than Marcus made in a week. She carried a bottle of wine and wore the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Martha," she exclaimed, air kissing my cheek. "The house smells amazing. You've outdone yourself." Brandon was more subdued, kissing my forehead and murmuring something about the heat. He looked tired, stressed. I wondered if the pressure of maintaining his lifestyle was getting to him. Dinner conversations started safely enough. Lisa talked about their children's summer activities: tennis camp for 12-year-old Sarah, computer coding camp for 10-year-old Jake. Brandon discussed a new client at his insurance agency, a restaurant chain looking to expand throughout the Southeast. Marcus shared stories from his summer school program, working with at-risk kids who needed extra help to stay on track. His face lit up when he talked about a student who'd finally grasped algebra after weeks of struggle. For a moment, it felt like old times. Like a family gathering where everyone genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Then Brandon cleared his throat. "So, Mama, have you given any more thought to our conversation the other day?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Some. And I've been thinking about what home means to different people." Lisa leaned forward slightly, her interest sharpening. "That's very philosophical, Martha. But we're talking about practical matters." "Are we? Because I thought we were talking about my life and where I choose to live it." Brandon set down his fork. "We're talking about what makes sense, about being realistic about your needs and limitations." "My limitations? You're 73 years old, Mama. This house requires constant maintenance, yard work, and repairs. What happens when you can't handle stairs anymore? What happens if you fall and there's no one around to help? Marcus checks on me twice a week. My neighbors are good people. I have a medical alert system. I'm not helpless, Brandon." "But you're not 25 anymore either," Lisa interjected. "At some point, you have to accept that your needs are changing." Marcus had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now he spoke up. "Have her needs actually changed? Though, Mama still drives, still cooks, still takes care of herself in this house. She's not asking for help or complaining about the work involved." "That's not the point," Brandon said, his voice rising slightly. "The point is being proactive instead of reactive. The point is making smart decisions before they're forced on you." "Smart for whom?" I asked quietly. "For everyone involved. Including you and Lisa?" Brandon had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Yes, including us. I'm not going to pretend we wouldn't benefit from a larger house. Sarah and Jake are getting older. They need more space. But that doesn't mean we don't have your best interests at heart. And you think my best interests involve giving up my home so you can have more space? I think your best interests involve being safe and comfortable, and not having to worry about maintaining a property that's too big for your current needs. Lisa reached across the table and patted my hand. We've looked at Sunset Manor, Martha. It's lovely. They have a craft room, a library, organized trips to museums and theaters. You'd have built-in social activities and friends your own age. Friends my own age, I repeated. As opposed to my family? That's not what she meant. Brandon said quickly. Isn't it? Because it sounds like you're both very eager to relocate me somewhere convenient, where I'll have friends my own age and you can have my house without feeling guilty about it. The conversation was spiraling exactly where I'd expected it to go. Brandon and Lisa had their arguments prepared, their justifications rehearsed. They'd probably practiced this entire discussion, anticipating my objections and preparing their responses. Marcus tried to steer things back toward compromise. What if there were ways to make the house more manageable without Mama having to leave? We could hire a cleaning service, get help with yard work. That's expensive, Brandon said dismissively, and it doesn't address the underlying issue. Which is that she's rattling around in a 4-bedroom house like a ghost nobody wants to see. The words hung in the air like a curse. Brandon realized immediately that he'd said too much, but it was too late. The mask had slipped, revealing the ugly truth underneath all his concern and practicality. There it is, I said softly. The real problem, not that I need help or can't manage. The real problem is that I'm inconvenient. I'm taking up the space you want, and my continued existence in this house is an obstacle to your plans. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. And now I know exactly where I stand with you. Lisa tried to salvage the situation. Martha, I think emotions are running high. Maybe we should take a break. No, I said, standing up from the table. I think we should finish this conversation. Brandon, you want to know what I've decided? He nodded warily. I've decided that you're absolutely right. I am taking up too much space, so I'm going to fix that problem. You are? Yes, but not the way you think. I walked to the kitchen counter where I'd left Harold's business card. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling my lawyer. I'm transferring ownership of this house to Marcus. The silence that followed was deafening. Brandon's face went white, then red, then white again. Lisa's mouth fell open. Marcus looked stricken. You can't do that, Brandon whispered. Actually, I can. It's my house, and I can give it to whomever I choose. Since you think I'm taking up space that doesn't belong to me, I'll make sure that space goes to someone who wants me in it. This is insane, Lisa said, her composure finally cracking. You're going to disinherit your own son, because he suggested you might be happier somewhere else. I'm going to give my home to the son who's never made me feel like an inconvenience. To the son who visits because he wants to, not because he feels obligated. To the son who's never once suggested that I don't belong in the house I've lived in for 40 years. Brandon found his voice. Mama, please, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Don't make a decision you'll regret. The only thing I regret is not seeing your true feelings sooner. The only thing I regret is believing that family meant something to you beyond what you could get from it. Marcus finally spoke. Mama, maybe we should all cool down. Maybe Brandon and Lisa should go home, and we can talk about this more tomorrow. There's nothing more to talk about, I said firmly. My mind is made up. Brandon stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Fine. Make your decision. But don't expect me to stick around and watch you give away everything Dad worked for to someone who doesn't deserve it. Someone who doesn't deserve it? Marcus said, his own temper finally showing. I've been here every week for 5 years. I've helped with repairs, with yard work, with doctor's appointments. Where have you been? I've been building a life, supporting a family, contributing to society instead of coasting on other people's generosity. You mean you've been planning how to get this house without actually having to take care of the person who lives in it? Brandon pointed an angry finger at his brother. Don't you dare lecture me about family responsibility. You've never had to support anyone but yourself, and you've never had to support anyone but your own ambitions. Stop it, I said sharply. Both of you. This isn't about you, Marcus. This is about my choice to give my property to someone who will cherish it instead of someone who sees it as an asset to be exploited. Brandon grabbed Lisa's hand. Come on. We're leaving. Brandon! Wait, Lisa said, but he was already heading for the door. Don't bother, I called after him. You said I was just taking up space. Well, now you don't have to worry about that anymore. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. A moment later, we heard Brandon's car start with an angry roar and speed down the driveway. Gravel sprang. Marcus and I stood in the sudden quiet of the dining room, surrounded by the ruins of what was supposed to be a family dinner. The fried chicken was getting cold, the cornbread sat untouched, and the carefully set table looked like a monument to failed communication. Well, Marcus said finally, that went about as well as expected. Better. Actually, I thought it would take longer for him to show his true colors. Mama, are you sure about this? Once you transfer the house, there's no going back. I looked around the dining room where we'd celebrated so many holidays, where Thomas had carved turkey every Thanksgiving, where the boys had blown out birthday candles and made wishes that seemed possible back then. Marcus, the only thing I'm not sure about is why I waited so long to do it. He hugged me then, and I felt the rightness of the decision settle into my bones like warmth from a good meal. This house would stay in the family. It would go to someone who understood that home wasn't about square footage or property values. It was about love. And love, I'd learned, wasn't something you could demand or manipulate or threaten someone into giving. It was something you earned. The phone started ringing at 7:30 Monday morning. I was in the garden deadheading the roses and trying to enjoy the brief coolness before the Georgia sun turned the day into a furnace. The cordless phone sat on the porch table, shrilling its demands across the yard. I let it ring. It stopped, then started again immediately. Then again. By the fourth round of ringing, I realized this wasn't going to stop, so I climbed the porch steps and picked up the receiver. Martha. Thank God. It was my sister Dorothy calling from Savannah. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. I was outside, Dot. What's wrong? What's wrong? Brandon called me at 6 in the morning. That's what's wrong. He's saying you've lost your mind, that you're giving away Thomas's house out of spite. I should have expected this. Brandon had always been strategic about building alliances when he wanted something. And what do you think? I think I need to hear your side before I form an opinion. But Martha, honey, Brandon sounded genuinely worried. He said you threatened to disinherit him completely. I didn't threaten anything. I made a decision. About the house, about my life and who I want to share it with. Dorothy sighed. She was 2 years older than me and had always felt responsible for giving advice whether it was wanted or not. Can you tell me what happened? From the beginning? I gave her a condensed version of events. Brandon's demand that I move, his comment about taking up space, the disastrous dinner. Dorothy listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. So you're really planning to give the house to Marcus? I'm planning to make sure it goes to someone who wants me in it, not someone who sees me as an obstacle to overcome. But Martha, Brandon is your eldest son. Tradition doesn't include calling your mother a ghost. Nobody wants to see. Another silence. Then Dorothy said quietly, He really said that? Twice? Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. The sympathy in her voice was almost my undoing. I'd been running on anger and determination since Saturday night, but hearing compassion from someone who'd known me my whole life made the hurt resurface. I raised that boy, Dot. I taught him how to tie his shoes and ride a bicycle and treat people with respect. How did I fail so completely that he thinks it's acceptable to talk to me that way? You didn't fail. Some people just get so focused on what they want that they forget how to see anything else. Including their own mother, apparently. What does Marcus say about all this? He's worried about the family falling apart completely. He thinks there might still be a way to fix things. And you don't? I watched a blue jay chase a smaller bird away from the feeder Thomas had built. Nature was honest about competition. No pretense, no manipulation, just clear intentions and predictable consequences. I think some things can't be unfixed. Dot. I think some words can't be taken back. After Dorothy hung up, promising to call again soon, the phone remained mercifully quiet for exactly 37 minutes. Then it started again. This time it was my neighbor from across the street, Helen Morrison. Helen was 78 and had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone. She'd watched our boys grow up, had brought casseroles when Thomas died, and generally kept track of everyone's business with the efficiency of a small-town newspaper. "Martha, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I saw Brandon's car leaving Saturday night rather dramatically." Helen had a talent for making statements sound like questions when she was fishing for information. "We had a family discussion that didn't go as planned." "I see. And this morning I noticed a strange car in your driveway. A black sedan that looked rather official." Harold had arrived at 9 o'clock sharp with a briefcase full of papers. We'd spent 2 hours going over every detail of the trust transfer, making sure I understood exactly what I was signing and what it would mean. "That was my lawyer, Helen. Just some paperwork." "Oh, well, I hope everything is all right. If you need anything at all." "I appreciate that, Helen. Really." But I knew that by noon, Helen would have called at least 6 other neighbors to share her observations about the mysterious sedan and the Saturday night drama. Small-town networks moved faster than the internet when it came to spreading news. Harold had been thorough in explaining the legal implications of what we were doing. The house would legally belong to Marcus within 30 days of filing the paperwork. I would retain what was called a life estate, meaning I could live there as long as I wanted, make any changes I deemed necessary, and basically continue as if nothing had changed. The only difference would be that Brandon would have no legal claim to the property, even after my death. If he contested the arrangement, he'd be challenging Marcus's ownership, not mine. And since Marcus hadn't coerced or manipulated anyone, such a challenge would be virtually impossible to win. "I want to make sure you understand," Harold had said. "This is going to create a permanent rift in your family. Once Brandon realizes what you've done, there's no pretending it was a momentary decision made in anger." "Good," I'd said. "I want it to be permanent. I want there to be consequences for treating family like disposable assets. And you're prepared for the possibility that Brandon might never speak to you again." I'd thought about that question for a long moment, sitting in my kitchen while Harold waited patiently for my answer. The Theckin where I'd packed countless school lunches, where I'd bandaged scraped knees and listened to teenage heartbreak, where I'd taught both boys how to make pancakes and scrambled eggs. "Harold, if Brandon never speaks to me again because I won't give him my house, then we never really had a relationship worth preserving anyway." Tuesday brought its own complications. I was watering the front flower beds when Lisa's white SUV pulled into my driveway. She sat behind the wheel for several minutes. Engine running, air conditioning no doubt protecting her from the morning heat. Finally, she turned off the car and walked toward me with the careful steps of someone approaching a potentially dangerous animal. "Martha, could we talk?" "Of course. Maybe inside? It's getting warm out here." We settled in the living room, Lisa perched on the edge of the sofa as if ready to flee at any moment. She looked tired, stressed. Her usual perfect composure showed cracks around the edges. "I came to apologize," she said without preamble. "For what?" "For Saturday night. For the way Brandon spoke to you. For my part in pushing this whole situation." I waited. Lisa wasn't the apologizing type unless she wanted something. "The thing is, Martha, we really do need more space. Sarah and Jake are at ages where they need privacy. Separate bathrooms, room for friends to visit. Our current house just isn't working anymore." I understand that. And when we started talking about options, this house seemed like such a perfect solution. 4 bedrooms, all that land for the kids to play, excellent schools. It felt like it could work for everyone. "Everyone except me," Lisa winced. "We thought you might actually enjoy Sunset Manor. The activities, the social opportunities. We thought it might be good for you to be around people your own age who understand what you're going through." "What am I going through?" "Widowhood. The challenges of aging. The loneliness of living in a house full of memories. I studied Lisa's face, trying to determine if she genuinely believed what she was saying, or if this was another manipulation attempt. Her expression seemed sincere, but Lisa had always been good at seeming sincere when it served her purposes. Lisa, can I ask you something? Of course. When you and Brandon drive by this house, what do you see? She looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, literally. When you look at this house, what do you see? I see a beautiful home with great potential. Good bones, established landscaping, a perfect layout for a growing family. And when I look at this house, I see 40 years of my life. I see the kitchen where I taught my boys to cook. I see the yard where they played with their friends. I see the bedroom where Thomas and I held each other during thunderstorms because I was afraid of the lightning. Lisa's expression shifted slightly, as if she was beginning to understand something she hadn't considered before. Every room in this house tells a story, Lisa. Every corner holds a memory. When you see square footage and potential, I see a lifetime of love and loss and joy and sorrow all woven together into something that can't be replaced or replicated. But memories can travel with you, can't they? You could take photos, keep mementos. Could you pack up your children's childhood and carry it with you to a new place? Could you reduce everything that matters about your family to a few photographs and some mementos? Lisa was quiet for a long moment. I never thought about it that way. Brandon asked me why I was taking up so much space. But this isn't just space to me. This is my life, and I'm not ready to pack up my life and move it to a facility where other people decide when I eat and what activities I should enjoy. What if we helped you stay here? What if we hired people to help with maintenance and upkeep? And in return, maybe when you're ready to downsize, or when you... She struggled for words. When will I die? Yes. When that time comes, maybe the house could transition to our family. I appreciated that Lisa was at least being honest now, even if her honesty revealed the transactional nature of her thinking. Lisa, that's exactly the arrangement I'm making. Except the house is going to transition to Marcus instead of Brandon. But Brandon is the older son. He's established, he has children who would benefit from growing up here. And Marcus is the son who's never made me feel like an inconvenience, who visits because he wants to, not because he's waiting for me to die so he can inherit my house. Lisa's composure finally cracked completely. This is going to destroy our family. Your family will be fine. You'll find another house, in another neighborhood, with excellent schools and plenty of space. What's being destroyed is the illusion that Brandon could treat me however he wanted without consequences. He didn't mean what he said Saturday night. He was frustrated. He spoke without thinking. Lisa, people don't accidentally compare their mothers to ghosts. Nobody wants to see. That kind of cruelty comes from somewhere deep inside, from feelings he's been carrying for a long time. What can we do to fix this? The question hung between us like a bridge. Neither of us was sure would hold our weight. I considered my words carefully. Nothing. Brandon made his choice when he decided I was the problem instead of looking for solutions that didn't involve displacing me. Now I've made mine. Lisa left shortly after that, her goodbye stiff and formal. I watched her SUV disappear down the street and wondered if I'd see her again anytime soon. Probably not until Brandon decided on his next strategy for getting what he wanted. Wednesday evening brought Marcus with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine. We sat on the back porch sharing lo mein and sweet and sour chicken while fireflies began their nightly dance among the oak trees. Harold filed the paperwork today, I told him. Marcus nodded, pushing food around on his plate. How do you feel about it? Relieved. Like I finally did something instead of just letting things happen to me. Brandon called me. I figured he would. What did he say? He wants me to talk you out of it. He thinks if I refuse to accept the house, you'll change your mind and go back to the original will. And what did you tell him? I told him I'd think about it. I set down my chopsticks and looked at Marcus carefully. Are you having second thoughts? I'm having a lot of thoughts. This is a big responsibility, Mama, a big gift. Part of me feels like I don't deserve it. Based on what? Based on the fact that I'm 38 years old and I've never owned anything more valuable than my car. Based on the fact that Brandon has worked harder to build a conventional life. And maybe he does deserve the security this house would provide for his family. Marcus, can I tell you something your father used to say? Of course. He used to say that deserving something wasn't about what you'd accomplished or how hard you'd worked for other things. He said deserving something was about what you'd do with it once you had it. A firefly landed on the porch railing, blinking its tiny light like a signal from the gathering darkness. What do you think Brandon would do with this house if he got it? Marcus considered the question. He'd probably renovate it, update the kitchen, modernize the bathrooms, make it more efficient and valuable. And what would you do with it? I'd take care of it, keep the garden growing, maybe host holiday dinners like you and Dad used to do. I don't know. Preserve what's good about it while making sure it stays a home instead of just becoming an investment. Then you understand why the house belongs with you. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the neighborhood. A dog barked in the distance. A car drove by with music playing softly through open windows. The ordinary sounds of people living their lives in the place they called home. There's something else, Marcus said eventually. What? Brandon isn't giving up. He's talking to other family members, trying to build support for the idea that you're not thinking clearly. He's suggesting that grief over Dad might be affecting your judgment. Who's he talking to? Aunt Dorothy, for one. Uncle Richard in Atlanta. Some of the cousins. I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest. He's trying to have me declared incompetent. I don't think it would work. You're clearly thinking fine. You're handling your own affairs. There's no evidence of any cognitive problems. But he might try to create doubt about whether you're making rational decisions. Let him try. Harold anticipated that possibility. That's why we spent so much time documenting my mental state and my reasons for the transfer. That's why he had me evaluated by his associate who specializes in elder law. You were evaluated Tuesday afternoon, Dr. Patricia Reynolds. She's a psychologist who works with elderly clients. She spent 2 hours with me, asking questions, reviewing my decision-making process, and documenting that I'm fully competent to make legal and financial decisions. Marcus smiled for the first time, all evening. You really have thought of everything. I've lived long enough to know that when you're doing something someone else doesn't want you to do, you'd better make sure you've covered all the bases. Thursday morning brought the most unexpected visitor of all. I was reading on the front porch when a taxi pulled up to the curb. A young woman got out, paid the driver, and walked up my front walkway with purpose. She was maybe 25, with long dark hair and Brandon's distinctive nose. It took me a moment to realize who she was. Grandma Martha? Rebecca? Is that really you? Brandon's daughter from his first marriage. I hadn't seen her since she graduated high school 7 years ago. She'd been 18 then, angry at her father for the divorce, angry at the world in general. Now she stood on my porch, looking like a young woman who'd found her way. Can we talk? Of course, sweetheart. Come in, come in. We settled in the kitchen, and I made coffee while Rebecca looked around with obvious nostalgia. She'd spent countless afternoons in this house during her childhood, before Brandon remarried and started his new family. Dad doesn't know I'm here, she said without preamble. I didn't think he did. He called me last night. He wanted me to know that you'd lost your mind and were giving away his inheritance out of spite. I handed her a mug of coffee and sat down across from her. And what do you think? Rebecca smiled. And for a moment she looked exactly like Brandon had at her age, before life had hardened his edges. I think Dad has always felt entitled to things that weren't his yet. And I think he finally pushed you too far. You know about what happened? I know enough. Uncle Marcus called me too. He wanted to make sure I heard both sides before I formed an opinion. And I wanted to tell you that I think you're doing the right thing. The words hit me like a gift I hadn't expected. Really? Really? Uncle Marcus has been more of a father to me these past few years than Dad has. When I was struggling in college, when I needed someone to talk to about career choices, when I just needed family support, Uncle Marcus was there. Dad was always too busy with his new family. Rebecca reached across the table and took my hand. I wanted you to know that not everyone thinks you're crazy. Some of us think you're finally standing up for yourself. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know. There's something else. Something Dad doesn't know. What? I'm getting married next spring. And when I do, I want Uncle Marcus to walk me down the aisle. The simple statement carried the weight of 1,000 family dynamics, 1,000 small betrayals and kindnesses that had accumulated over the years. Does your father know? Not yet, but he will soon enough. Rebecca left an hour later, taking another taxi back to the airport for her flight home to Seattle. But her visit had given me something I hadn't expected: confirmation that my decision was about more than just property or hurt feelings. It was about recognizing the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose to keep. And sometimes, those weren't the same thing at all. The letter arrived on a Friday morning, delivered by certified mail. I had to sign for it, which immediately told me this wasn't good news. The return address read Caldwell, Pierce and Associates, attorneys at law, in raised lettering that screamed expensive legal representation. Inside, 12 pages of legal jargon boiled down to a simple threat. Brandon was challenging my mental competency and demanding a formal evaluation of my decision-making capacity. His new lawyers claimed I was suffering from diminished cognitive function exacerbated by grief and social isolation, and that my recent property transfer constituted evidence of impaired judgment and possible elder abuse. Elder abuse. As if Marcus had somehow manipulated me into giving him the house, instead of Brandon manipulating me into giving it up. I called Harold immediately. I was expecting this, he said when I read him portions of the letter. Brandon's hired Richard Caldwell. He's expensive and he's ruthless, but he's not magic. We documented everything properly, and Dr. Reynolds' evaluation will hold up under scrutiny. What happens now? Now we respond. We provide all our documentation, we stand by our procedures, and we let the court see that this is exactly what it appears to be: a competent adult making a legal decision that her son doesn't like. How long will this take? Could be months. Caldwell will drag it out as long as possible, hoping you'll get tired of fighting and agree to a compromise. What kind of compromise? Probably splitting the house sale proceeds between both sons, or reverting to your original will, something that gives Brandon what he wants without making him look like he's completely disregarding your wishes. I hung up feeling exhausted before the battle had even begun. This was exactly what Brandon wanted: to wear me down, make the fight more trouble than it was worth, force me to give in just to have peace. But peace wasn't what I wanted anymore. Justice was. That afternoon, Marcus found me in the garden, aggressively deadheading roses with more force than the task required. I heard about the letter, he said. Word travels fast. Harold called me. He wanted to make sure I knew what we were up against. I straightened up, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my gardening glove. Are you having second thoughts about accepting the house? I'm having thoughts about whether it's worth putting you through a legal battle. Maybe we should just give Brandon what he wants and be done with it. Marcus, sit down. He settled on the garden bench Thomas had built, the one where we'd had so many important conversations over the years. The afternoon light filtered through the oak leaves, dappling the ground with shifting patterns of sun and shadow. Do you remember when you were 12 and that bully at school kept taking your lunch money? Danny Richardson. Yeah, I remember. And do you remember what your father told you when you wanted to just give him the money every day to avoid the fights? Marcus smiled slightly. He said bullies don't stop when you give them what they want. They just ask for more. Exactly. Brandon isn't going to be satisfied with getting this house. Marcus, he's going to spend the rest of my life testing how far he can push me, taking whatever he can get, treating me like an obstacle to his comfort. But the stress of fighting him, the stress of giving in, would be worse. At least this way, I'm fighting for something I believe in instead of just rolling over and letting him have whatever he wants. A blue jay landed on the bird feeder, its bright crest catching the sunlight. We watched it for a moment, appreciating the simple beauty of a creature that knew exactly what it wanted and took it without apology. "There's something else," Marcus said. "Something you should know before this goes any further." "What?" "Brandon's been talking to people at his church, his golf club, around town. He's telling everyone that you're showing signs of dementia and that I'm taking advantage of your condition." The words hit like a physical blow. He's what? He's building a narrative, making it seem like he's the responsible son trying to protect his mother from being exploited by his manipulative brother. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and pure. He's publicly questioning my mental capacity. Not directly. He's too smart for that. He's just expressing concern about your recent behavior and hoping that someone will intervene before you make any more confused decisions. That calculating little... I stopped myself, remembering that despite everything, Marcus still loved his brother. The worst part is, some people are buying it. Mrs. Patterson from the church auxiliary called Helen Morrison to ask if she'd noticed you acting strangely. Helen told her you seemed fine, but the fact that people are even asking... I stood up abruptly, pulling off my gardening gloves with sharp movements. "Get in the car." "Where are we going?" To set the record straight. Our first stop was Helen Morrison's house. Helen answered the door in her usual uniform of floral house dress and sensible shoes, her expression carefully neutral. "Martha, dear, how are you feeling?" The question's phrasing told me everything I needed to know about what conversation she'd been having. "I'm feeling angry, Helen. I understand people have been asking about my mental state." Helen's face flushed. "Well, there have been some concerns expressed." "By whom?" "By people who care about you, people who've noticed some changes in your behavior lately." "What changes?" Helen glanced nervously at Marcus, as if his presence somehow proved something about my condition. "The sudden decision about the house, for one thing. It seemed very unlikely you would make such a drastic choice without consulting your family." "I consulted my family. I consulted the family member who's been treating me like family instead of like an inconvenience." "But Brandon is your eldest son. Traditionally..." "Helen, let me ask you something. When your husband died 15 years ago, did anyone question your right to stay in your house?" "That's different." "How?" I didn't have children fighting over it." "Neither do I. I have one child who wants to support my decision to stay in my home, and one child who wants to force me out of it. The fighting is Brandon's choice, not mine." Helen looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her apron strings. "People are just worried about you, dear. Living alone in that big house, making such big decisions without proper guidance." "Helen, I've been making my own decisions for 73 years. I think I've gotten pretty good at it by now." Our next stop was the church. Pastor Williams was in his office, preparing for Sunday's sermon. He was a good man, thoughtful and kind, but he'd known Brandon since childhood and had presided over his wedding to Lisa. "Martha, Marcus, what a pleasant surprise. Please, sit down." We settled into the worn chairs across from his desk. The office smelled like old books and coffee, comforting in its familiarity. "Pastor Williams, I understand there's been some concern expressed about my mental state." He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "There's been some discussion about recent events." "Yes." "What kind of discussion?" "Brandon came to see me earlier this week. He's worried about you, Martha. He feels like recent decisions you've made might not be in your best interest, such as transferring your house to Marcus instead of maintaining the arrangement you and Thomas originally planned." "And what did you tell him?" Pastor Williams leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "I told him that you've always seemed perfectly capable of making your own decisions, and that family disagreements aren't necessarily signs of mental decline." "Thank you for that." "But I also told him that if he's genuinely concerned about your welfare, there are proper channels for addressing those concerns." "You mean legal challenges to my competency?" "I mean making sure that if there are problems, they're addressed appropriately." Marcus spoke up for the first time. "Pastor Williams, with respect, the only problem here is that Brandon doesn't like his mother's decision. He's trying to create doubt about her mental state because he can't accept that she chose someone else. That's a serious accusation, Marcus. It's a serious situation. Brandon isn't concerned about our mother's welfare. He's concerned about his inheritance. Pastor Williams was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands folded on the desk. Martha, can I ask you something directly? Of course. Are you transferring the house to Marcus because you believe it's the right thing to do, or because you're angry with Brandon? The question was fair, and I appreciated his directness. Both. I'm angry with Brandon because of how he's treated me, but I'm giving the house to Marcus because he's the son who's earned it. How has he earned it? By treating me like his mother instead of like an obstacle to his plans. By visiting because he wants to. Not because he feels obligated. By never once suggesting that I don't belong in my own home. And you don't think there's any chance you might regret this decision later? Pastor Williams, the only thing I regret is not seeing Brandon's true character sooner. Our final stop was the golf club where Brandon was a member. I'd never been inside before. It wasn't the kind of place that welcomed people like me, but I marched through the front door with Marcus behind me, heading for the dining room where I knew Brandon often held business lunches. The maitre d' tried to stop us. Excuse me. Are you a member? We're looking for Brandon Walker, I said firmly. I'm sorry, but non-members aren't allowed in the dining areas without. I'm his mother. Something in my tone must have convinced him not to argue further. He gestured toward the dining room, where I could see Brandon sitting at a corner table with two other men in expensive suits. I walked directly to his table, Marcus following reluctantly. The conversation stopped as we approached. Brandon's face went white, then red. Mother, what are you doing here? I'm here to ask you a question in front of witnesses. The two other men looked between us with obvious discomfort. One started to rise. Maybe we should stay, I said firmly. I want you to hear this. I turned back to Brandon. I want you to look me in the eye and tell these gentlemen whether you honestly believe I'm mentally incompetent. Mother, this isn't the place. This is exactly the place. You've been telling people all over town that I'm showing signs of dementia and making confused decisions. I want you to say that to my face, right now in front of people who can judge for themselves whether I seem confused. Brandon's jaw worked silently. The other men watched with fascination, probably realizing they were witnessing family drama that would be discussed for months. Well, I pressed, do I seem confused to you? Unable to make rational decisions? In need of someone else to manage my affairs? You seem angry, Brandon said finally. I am angry, but anger isn't mental illness. Brandon, anger is a rational response to being treated badly by someone you love. Mother, please, let's discuss this privately. We tried discussing it privately. You compared me to a ghost nobody wants to see. Now we're discussing it publicly, and I want these gentlemen to hear exactly what kind of son challenges his mother's mental competency because she won't give him her house. One of the men cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should reschedule our meeting, Brandon. No, I said. Stay. I want you to meet the woman Brandon claims is too mentally impaired to control her own property. I turned to face them directly. Gentlemen, my name is Martha Walker. I'm 73 years old. I've lived in the same house for 40 years, manage my own finances, drive my own car, and make my own decisions. My son Brandon wants my house, and because I've decided to give it to his brother instead, he's now claiming I'm mentally incompetent. Does that seem like the action of a confused old woman, or the action of a mother who's tired of being manipulated? The men exchanged glances. One of them, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair, spoke carefully. You seem very articulate and aware to me, Mrs. Walker. Thank you. Brandon, I believe you have something to say to these gentlemen. Brandon's face was crimson now. Mother, you're embarrassing yourself. No, Brandon. I'm embarrassing you. There's a difference. We left the golf club with our point made. By evening, the story would be all over town. Martha Walker confronting her son in public, demonstrating very clearly that she was neither confused nor manipulated. That night, I called Harold to update him on our activities. Martha, what you did today was brilliant, he said. Brandon's legal challenge just became much harder to maintain. How can he claim you're mentally incompetent when you just gave a clear, coherent public demonstration of your reasoning abilities? Will it be enough? It'll help. Combined with Dr. Reynolds' evaluation and our documentation, it builds a very strong case that you knew exactly what you were doing and why. What happens next? Now we wait for Caldwell to make his next move. But I think you may have just forced Brandon into a corner. He can either back down from his competency challenge, or he can proceed knowing that everyone in town has seen evidence that contradicts his claims. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and thought about the day's events. Part of me felt satisfied that I'd fought back, that I'd refused to let Brandon's narrative go unchallenged. But another part of me felt sad about what we'd become as a family. The boy I'd raised, the one who'd cried when he saw injured animals and insisted on saying prayers every night, had turned into a man who would publicly question his mother's sanity to get what he wanted. Marcus found me there an hour later, staring into my teacup as if it held answers to questions I hadn't figured out how to ask yet. "You okay?" "I'm thinking about how we got here, about where I went wrong with Brandon." "You didn't go wrong, Mama. Some people just make choices that disappoint us, no matter how well we raised them. He used to be such a sweet little boy, so protective of me, so eager to help with everything. He was. And maybe somewhere inside he still is. But right now that part of him is buried under a lot of anger and entitlement. Do you think there's any chance we could fix this? Find our way back to being a family?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I think that would require Brandon to admit he was wrong. To acknowledge that he's been treating you badly and that his behavior has consequences. Do you think he's capable of that?" I considered the question, thinking about the man I'd confronted at the golf club. The way he'd looked at me with something close to hatred when I'd refused to back down. "No," I said finally. "I don't think he is." "Then you've made the right choice. You've chosen to protect yourself and your legacy, and you've chosen to reward the person who's treated you with respect. Even if it means losing Brandon forever." "Mama, you lost Brandon a long time ago. You just finally stopped pretending otherwise." Outside, a thunderstorm was building. I could hear the first rumbles of thunder in the distance, see the flashes of lightning beginning to illuminate the night sky. Soon the rain would come, washing the air clean and watering the garden that Thomas and I had planted together. Some storms were destructive, tearing apart everything in their path, but others were necessary, clearing away what was dead and making room for new growth. I had a feeling this storm would be both. The private investigator Harold recommended looked nothing like what I'd expected. Jennifer Chen was a small woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the soft voice of someone who made people comfortable enough to tell her their secrets. She arrived at my house on a Wednesday evening, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the sort of unremarkable business attire that helped her blend into any situation. "Mrs. Walker, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," she said as we settled in my living room. Harold explained the situation. "Your son is challenging your competency, and you'd like to be prepared for whatever his legal team might present." "That's right. I want to know what Brandon's been doing, who he's been talking to, and what kind of case he thinks he can build." Jennifer opened her portfolio and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been investigating for 2 weeks. What I found is interesting." "Tell me." "Let's start with Brandon's financial situation. On the surface, everything looks successful. Nice house, expensive cars, country club membership, private schools for the kids. But underneath, he's severely overextended." She handed me a series of documents. "He's borrowed against his house twice in the past 3 years. His credit cards are maxed out. His business is struggling because he's been focusing more on lifestyle than on actual client service." I studied the papers, seeing numbers that told a story of someone living far beyond their means. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that losing potential inheritance from your estate would be financially devastating. He's counting on this house to solve his money problems." "What about Lisa?" "Lisa comes from a wealthy family, but she's been cut off. Apparently, her parents disapproved of her spending habits, and the way she treats service staff. They've made it clear that they won't be financing Brandon and Lisa's lifestyle anymore. This explained so much about the desperation I'd sensed in both of them. They weren't just wanting my house, they needed it. There's more, Jennifer continued. Brandon's been meeting regularly with Richard Caldwell for the past 6 months. Long before your family dinner, long before you made any decisions about the house. 6 months? They've been planning this competency challenge since the spring. I have photos of them meeting at restaurants, copies of documents they've been preparing. This wasn't a reaction to your decision, Mrs. Walker. This was a premeditated strategy to get control of your assets. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been worrying about Brandon's harsh words and emotional manipulation, he'd been plotting legal action to declare me incompetent. What kind of case are they planning to present? Jennifer pulled out another set of documents. They're going to argue that you've become increasingly isolated and dependent on Marcus for decision-making. They'll claim that your grief over your husband's death has led to impaired judgment, and that Marcus has been gradually manipulating you into making decisions that benefit him. Based on what evidence? That's where it gets interesting. They don't have much real evidence, so they're manufacturing it. Brandon's been carefully documenting every interaction he's had with you, putting his own spin on conversations to make you seem confused or manipulated. She showed me typed reports in Brandon's handwriting, describing phone calls and visits in ways that bore little resemblance to reality. According to his version, I was a confused elderly woman who couldn't remember conversations, who got agitated when pressed for details, who seemed to be parroting things Marcus had told me to say. He's been building a file on me for months, and he's been coaching others to do the same. I have recorded conversations where Brandon is telling people what signs to look for, what questions to ask you, how to document any responses that might seem unusual. The recordings Jennifer played were damning. Brandon's voice, coaching church members and neighbors to pay attention to my behavior, to note anything that might seem like evidence of cognitive decline. He was essentially training people to see me as incompetent. There's something else you need to know, Jennifer said. Brandon's been in contact with several staff members at Sunset Manor. He's already put down a deposit on a room for you. He what? 3 months ago, he paid $5,000 to reserve a spot in their memory care unit. He told them you'd be moving in as soon as some family issues were resolved. The memory care unit. Not just assisted living, but the section for people with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Brandon hadn't just been planning to have me declared incompetent, he'd been planning to have me institutionalized. How is that legal? It's not, if you're competent to make your own decisions. But if a court declares you incompetent and appoints Brandon as your guardian, he would have the authority to make those decisions for you. I felt nauseated, thinking about how close I'd come to walking into this trap. If I hadn't stood up to Brandon, if I hadn't transferred the house to Marcus, I might have found myself locked away in a facility while Brandon sold my home and spent my money. What can we do with this information? We present it to the court as evidence that Brandon's competency challenge isn't based on concern for your welfare. It's based on a long-term plan to gain control of your assets. This kind of premeditation actually works against him legally. Jennifer left me with copies of everything she'd discovered. After she was gone, I sat in my kitchen reading through document after document that painted a picture of my own son as someone I didn't recognize. The Brandon I'd raised would never have plotted to have his mother declared incompetent and institutionalized, but the Brandon I was learning about had been planning exactly that for months. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was in the garden when a black town car pulled up to my house. An elderly man in an expensive suit got out and walked toward me with the confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to. Mrs. Walker, I'm Judge Robert Harrison. Retired. I wonder if I might have a word with you. I'd heard of Judge Harrison. He'd served on the county court for 30 years before retiring 5 years ago. He was respected, feared, and known for his no-nonsense approach to family law. Of course, Judge Harrison, please, come in. We settled in my living room, and he accepted my offer of coffee with the courtesy of a man who understood the importance of social rituals. "Mrs. Walker, I'm here because I've been following your situation with some interest. Your son's attorney, Richard Caldwell, is a former colleague of mine. We've had some conversations about the case he's preparing. I see. I want you to know that I find his approach troubling. In my 30 years on the bench, I saw many family disputes over inheritance and competency. The ones that bothered me most were the ones where financial motivation was disguised as concern for welfare. Is that what you think is happening here? I think your son is trying to use the legal system to overturn a decision he doesn't like, and I think he's willing to destroy your reputation and your autonomy to get what he wants." Judge Harrison set down his coffee cup and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Walker, would you be willing to submit to an independent evaluation? Not court-ordered, but voluntary. I know a psychiatrist in Atlanta who specializes in geriatric assessment. If you test competent under his evaluation, it would be very difficult for any court to rule otherwise." "What would that involve?" "A full day of testing, cognitive function, memory assessment, reasoning ability, emotional stability. It's thorough, but it's also definitive. Dr. Peterson has evaluated thousands of elderly clients, and his assessments are considered the gold standard in Georgia courts. And if I agree to this, then we present the results proactively before Brandon's team can paint you as someone trying to avoid evaluation. It shows confidence in your mental state and willingness to submit to objective assessment." I thought about it for only a moment. "When can we schedule it?" The following week, Marcus drove me to Atlanta for the evaluation. Dr. Peterson's office was in a medical complex downtown, all glass and steel, and the kind of impersonal efficiency that made me grateful I didn't live in the city. The testing was exhausting. Hours of questions, puzzles, memory exercises, psychological assessments. Dr. Peterson was thorough but kind, explaining each test and why it was necessary. He asked about my family situation, my living arrangements, my decision-making process regarding the house transfer. "Mrs. Walker, can you tell me why you decided to give your house to Marcus instead of Brandon?" I explained about Brandon's phone call, his demand that I move to Sunset Manor, his comment about taking up space. I told him about the family dinner, about Brandon's cruel words, about my realization that he saw me as an obstacle rather than his mother. "And you made this decision in anger." "I made this decision in clarity. The anger helped me see the situation honestly, but the decision was based on logic. I wanted my house to go to the son who would value it, and who values me." "Have you ever regretted the decision?" "Only once. When? When I learned that Brandon had been planning to have me declared incompetent for months before I made it. I regretted not seeing his true intentions sooner." Dr. Peterson made notes throughout our conversation. At the end of the day, he told me the results would be available within a week. "How do you think I did?" I asked as we prepared to leave. "Mrs. Walker, you tested in the 95th percentile for cognitive function in your age group. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning is sound, and your emotional responses are entirely appropriate to your circumstances. Anyone who questions your competency is either misinformed or motivated by factors that have nothing to do with your mental state." The official report arrived 5 days later. 12 pages of test results, all confirming what I already knew. I was fully competent to make my own decisions. Dr. Peterson's conclusion was unambiguous. Mrs. Walker demonstrates superior cognitive function, excellent judgment, and emotional stability consistent with a healthy adult of any age. There is no evidence of any condition that would impair her ability to manage her affairs or make rational decisions about her property and relationship. Harold was jubilant when I brought him the report. "Martha, this is better than I hoped for. Caldwell's going to have a very hard time challenging these results. Dr. Peterson's reputation is impeccable. What happens now? Now we go on the offensive. We present this evaluation, along with Jennifer's investigation results. We show the court that Brandon's challenge isn't based on medical evidence. It's based on greed and manipulation. But before we could present anything to the court, Brandon made his next move. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening while I was watching the news. "Mother, we need to talk." His voice was different, less aggressive, more careful. I wondered what had changed. "What about Brandon?" "About this whole situation. I think we've both said things we regret, and maybe it's time to find a middle ground." "What kind of middle ground?" "I've been thinking about what you said at the golf club. About feeling like I don't value you, or your feelings." "You're right. I've been focused on practical matters and I haven't been considerate of the emotional aspects of this situation." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd heard from him in years, but something in his tone made me suspicious. "Go on. What if we found a solution that honored your wishes while also addressing the practical concerns? What if you kept the house, but we set up a system where I helped manage the maintenance and upkeep? You'd stay in control, but you wouldn't have to worry about the burden of maintaining such a large property. And Marcus? Marcus could be part of the solution too. We could work together to make sure you're comfortable and secure." It sounded reasonable on the surface, but I'd learned to listen for what Brandon wasn't saying as much as what he was saying. "Brandon, have you withdrawn your competency challenge?" The pause was telling. "We can discuss that as part of the overall solution." "That's not an answer. Mother, I think if we can come to an agreement, the legal issues will resolve themselves." "What you're saying is that you'll stop trying to have me declared incompetent if I give you what you want." "I'm saying that families should work together to solve problems instead of fighting in court. And if I don't agree with your proposal," another pause, "then I guess we'll have to let the courts decide what's best for everyone." The threat was clear. Agree to his terms, or face a public legal battle where he'd try to destroy my reputation and autonomy. "Brandon, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you look at me, what do you see?" "I see my mother, someone I love and want to protect." "Really?" "Because when I look at this situation, I see a son who's been planning to have me declared incompetent for months. I see someone who put a deposit on a room in a memory care facility before he ever talked to me about moving. I see someone who's been coaching people to look for signs of my mental decline." The silence on the other end of the phone was complete. "I know about your meetings with Richard Caldwell, Brandon. I know about the financial investigation you had done on my assets. I know about the file you've been building, documenting my conversations to make me seem confused. I know about Sunset Manor." "Mother, I don't know what you think you know, but I know that you've been treating me like an enemy to be defeated instead of a mother to be loved. And now you want to negotiate a peace treaty that gives you everything you want in exchange for not following through on your plan to destroy me. That's not... You're misunderstanding." "No, Brandon. I'm understanding perfectly for the first time in years. The only thing I don't understand is how I raised a son who could plan to have his own mother institutionalized." I hung up before he could respond. Outside, the evening was settling over the neighborhood with the quiet beauty of a summer twilight. Children were playing in yards down the street, their laughter carrying on the warm air. Normal families, living normal lives, not plotting against each other for financial gain. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, having received his own phone call from Brandon. "He called you too?" "He wanted me to convince you to accept his offer. He said it would be better for everyone if we could settle this without going to court." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that you're perfectly capable of making your own decisions, and that if he was really concerned about your welfare, he would have had a conversation with you instead of planning a legal assault." "How did he respond to that?" "He said I was naive about the realities of family responsibility. He said sometimes you have to make hard decisions for people you love, even when they don't understand why those decisions are necessary." I looked at Marcus, seeing him clearly in the fading light. My younger son, who'd never questioned my right to live in my own house, who'd never suggested I was taking up too much space, who'd been visiting and caring for me without expecting anything in return. "Marcus, do you think I'm making the right choice? Fighting this instead of just giving Brandon what he wants?" "Mama, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for every elderly person whose children see them as obstacles instead of people. You're fighting for the principle that being old doesn't mean being powerless. even if it destroys our family. Our family was destroyed the moment Brandon decided to treat you like property instead of like his mother. All you're doing now is refusing to pretend otherwise. That night, I called Harold and told him about Brandon's offer and my response. You made the right choice, Martha. If you'd accepted his proposal, you would have been under his control for the rest of your life. Every decision would have been subject to his approval. Every choice filtered through his practical concerns. So what happens next? Next, we file our response to his competency challenge. We present Dr. Peterson's evaluation, Jennifer's investigation results, and we ask the court to sanction Brandon for filing a frivolous lawsuit motivated by financial gain rather than genuine concern. Sanctions? If the court agrees that his challenge was baseless and motivated by greed, they can order him to pay your legal fees and issue a formal reprimand. It's a way of discouraging people from using the legal system to harass family members. Will it work? With the evidence we have, I think it will. Brandon overplayed his hand when he started documenting conversations and putting deposits on institutional care. That's not the behavior of someone concerned about a parent's welfare. That's the behavior of someone planning a takeover. As I got ready for bed that night, I thought about the path that had led me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a widow trying to figure out how to live alone in the house where I'd raised my family. I'd been worried about being a burden, about making the right choices, about holding on to things that mattered while letting go of things that didn't. Now I was preparing for a legal battle with my own son, armed with evidence of his betrayal and protected by documentation of my competency. It wasn't the future I would have chosen, but it was the future Brandon's choices had created. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, in my own house, making my own decisions, refusing to be anyone's victim. The war was coming, but I was ready for it. The courthouse in downtown Atlanta was an imposing granite monument to justice, with marble columns and brass fixtures that spoke of serious business conducted within its walls. I arrived early on the morning of the hearing, dressed in my best navy suit with the pearl necklace Thomas had given me for our 25th anniversary. If I was going to battle my own son in court, I was going to look like the competent, dignified woman I knew myself to be. Harold met me at the security checkpoint, carrying 2 briefcases filled with our evidence. Behind him walked Jennifer Chen and Dr. Peterson, both prepared to testify on my behalf. The sight of my legal team gave me confidence, but it also drove home the surreal nature of what was happening. I was 73 years old, and I needed lawyers and investigators to prove to a judge that I was capable of making decisions about my own life. "How are you feeling, Martha?" Harold asked as we rode the elevator to the courtroom. "Like I'm about to defend my right to exist," I said honestly. "That's not far from the truth. But remember, we have everything we need to win this. Brandon's case is built on greed disguised as concern, and we have the evidence to prove it." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly harsh. Brandon was already seated at the plaintiff's table with Richard Caldwell, his expensive attorney. Lisa sat in the gallery behind them, her face carefully composed but her hands fidgeting with her purse strap. Brandon didn't look at me when I entered. He stared straight ahead, jaw set, looking like a man who'd convinced himself he was doing the right thing. I wondered if he actually believed his own narrative about protecting me, or if he knew exactly what this was. A calculated attempt to steal my autonomy because I wouldn't give him what he wanted. Judge Patricia Vance entered promptly at 9 o'clock. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Harold had told me she was known for her no-nonsense approach to family law and her particular intolerance for frivolous lawsuits. "Good morning," Judge Vance said, settling behind the bench. "We're here today for a petition filed by Brandon Walker, requesting that the court declare his mother, Martha Walker, mentally incompetent and appoint him as her guardian. Mr. Caldwell, you may present your opening statement." Caldwell stood with practiced confidence, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd won many such cases. "Your Honor, this is a heartbreaking situation where an elderly woman's grief and isolation have led to increasingly poor decision-making. Mrs. Walker has been living alone since her husband's death, with minimal social contact beyond her younger son Marcus, who has gradually gained undue influence over her choices. He painted a picture of me as a confused widow, easily manipulated by Marcus and making irrational decisions about my property. According to his version, transferring my house to Marcus was just the latest in a series of choices that demonstrated my declining mental capacity. The respondent has shown increasing confusion about financial matters, difficulty remembering conversations, and a tendency to become agitated when family members express legitimate concerns about her welfare. Mr. Brandon Walker seeks guardianship not for personal gain, but out of love and concern for his mother's safety and security. It was a masterful performance, painting Brandon as the devoted son and me as the declining mother who needed protection from myself. If I hadn't known the truth about his motivations, I might have found it convincing. Harold's opening was more direct. Your Honor, this case has nothing to do with Mrs. Walker's mental capacity and everything to do with her son's financial desperation. Brandon Walker has been planning this competency challenge for months, not because his mother is incompetent, but because she made a property decision he didn't like. We will show that Ms. Walker is fully competent, that her decisions are rational and well considered, and that this petition is nothing more than an attempt to use the court system to override her legitimate choices. Caldwell called his first witness, Dr. Michael Patterson, a geriatric psychiatrist who'd never met me but had reviewed Brandon's documentation of our interactions. Based solely on Brandon's written reports, Dr. Patterson testified that I showed concerning signs of possible cognitive decline, consistent with early-stage dementia. In your professional opinion, Caldwell asked, would someone experiencing these symptoms be capable of making complex financial decisions? It would be inadvisable, Dr. Patterson replied. Patients in early stages of cognitive decline often retain the appearance of competency while actually being quite vulnerable to manipulation and poor judgment. It was infuriating to listen to a doctor I'd never met describe my mental state based on Brandon's biased reports. But Harold had warned me this would happen, and I forced myself to remain calm and composed. Caldwell's next witness was Mrs. Eleanor Patterson from our church, the woman who'd apparently been asking Helen Morrison about my behavior. She testified that I'd seemed different in recent months, more withdrawn and less social than before. Can you describe specific instances where Mrs. Walker's behavior concerned you? Caldwell asked. Well, she missed several church functions that she normally attended. And when I spoke with her after services, she seemed distant. Not quite herself. Did you observe any confusion or memory issues? She did seem to have trouble following our conversation about the church auxiliaries' fundraising plans. She kept asking me to repeat things. I wanted to stand up and shout that I'd been distracted during those conversations, because I was dealing with Brandon's pressure to sell my house, not because I was losing my mental faculties. But Harold had instructed me to remain silent and let him handle the testimony. The most damaging witness was Lisa. She took the stand looking perfectly put together and appropriately concerned, every inch the devoted daughter-in-law worried about her husband's aging mother. Mrs. Walker, how long have you known the respondent? 15 years since Brandon and I started dating. Have you observed changes in her behavior over the past year? Yes, significant changes. She's become much more reclusive, less interested in family gatherings. When we do visit, she seems confused about dates and times, and she often repeats the same stories multiple times during a single conversation. Can you give the court a specific example? At our last family dinner, she told us the same story about her late husband 3 different times within an hour. Each time she seemed to think she was telling it for the first time. It was a complete fabrication. I'd told one story about Thomas that evening, and I'd told it once, but Lisa delivered the lie with such conviction that I could see some doubt creeping into Judge Vance's expression. In your opinion, is Mrs. Walker capable of living alone safely? I don't believe so. She's had several incidents where she left the stove on, and she's forgotten to lock her doors at night. We're genuinely worried about her safety. More lies. I'd never left the stove on, and I was meticulous about locking doors, but again, Lisa's delivery was flawless, painting me as a danger to myself and others. Caldwell's final witness was Brandon himself. He took the stand with obvious reluctance, playing the role of the dutiful son forced to take difficult action for his mother's own good. "Mr. Walker, this must be very difficult for you. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do," Brandon said, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. "I love my mother dearly, but I can't stand by and watch her make decisions that put her at risk. Can you describe the conversation that led to your concern about her property transfer?" Brandon's version of our phone call bore little resemblance to reality. According to him, I'd seemed confused about why he was calling, had difficulty following the conversation, and had become irrationally angry when he suggested I might be happier in a more manageable living situation. She accused me of trying to steal her house, which was completely unfounded. I was simply trying to discuss options that might be better for her health and safety. "What about the property transfer to your brother Marcus?" That decision came out of nowhere. One day she was living normally in the house, the next day she was signing papers transferring ownership to Marcus. When I asked her about it, she couldn't give me a coherent explanation for why she'd made such a drastic decision. "Do you believe your mother was capable of understanding the implications of that transfer?" "No, I don't. I think she was confused and overwhelmed, and my brother took advantage of that confusion to manipulate her into giving him property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was a masterful performance." Brandon managed to sound heartbroken and concerned while painting me as an incompetent victim and Marcus as a manipulative predator. If I hadn't lived through the real conversations, I might have believed him myself. Then it was Harold's turn to cross-examine. "Mr. Walker, when did you first become concerned about your mother's mental capacity?" "Over the past year, I noticed changes in her behavior." "And yet you hired Richard Caldwell 6 months ago, long before the property transfer that supposedly prompted this petition. Can you explain that?" Brandon's composure slipped slightly. I wanted to be prepared in case the situation deteriorated." "Prepared for what, exactly?" "Prepared to protect my mother, if necessary." Harold pulled out documents from Jennifer's investigation. "Mr. Walker, did you place a deposit on a room at Sunset Manor 3 months ago?" "I was exploring options. A $5,000 deposit on a room in their memory care unit. The unit is specifically designed for patients with dementia and Alzheimer's disease." "You explored that option before your mother showed any signs of memory problems." "I was being proactive. And the detailed reports you've been keeping about your mother's conversations and behavior, when did you start documenting those?" When I started noticing issues." According to the dates on these reports, you started documenting your mother's concerning behavior in January. 6 months before she made the property transfer that supposedly demonstrated her incompetence. Can you explain why you were building a file on your mother's mental state so far in advance?" Brandon's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The timeline Harold was establishing made it clear that Brandon had been planning this competency challenge long before any supposed crisis. "Mr. Walker, what is your current financial situation?" "I object," Caldwell said quickly. "The petitioner's finances aren't relevant to his mother's mental capacity." "Your Honor," Harold responded, "they're relevant to his motivation for filing this petition." Judge Vance considered for a moment. "I'll allow it, within limits. Mr. Walker, have you borrowed against your house in the past 3 years?" "That's a personal matter. It's a matter of public record. You've taken out 2 home equity loans totaling $200,000. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Are you currently on those payments?" "We're managing our obligations." "That wasn't the question. Are you currently on your payments?" Brandon's jaw tightened. "We've had some temporary cash flow issues." "And your business? How many clients have you lost in the past year?" "Business fluctuates." Harold produced more documents. "According to these records, your insurance agency has lost 40% of its clients since last year. Would you say your financial situation is desperate?" "I'd say it's challenging but manageable. Manageable enough that you don't need your mother's $400,000 house to solve your problems." "This isn't about money, isn't it, Mr. Walker?" If your mother is declared incompetent, and you're appointed her guardian, you would have control over all her assets, including the house she transferred to your brother. Correct? I suppose. But that's not why. And as her guardian, you could reverse that property transfer and sell the house to pay for her care at Sunset Manor, where you've already made a deposit. Correct? Brandon was clearly uncomfortable now, his answers becoming shorter and more defensive. The goal would be to provide appropriate care. Appropriate care that conveniently solves your financial problems and gets you the house you wanted in the first place. Objection, Caldwell called. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Vance said, but her expression suggested Harold's point had been made. When Harold finished his cross-examination, Brandon looked like a man who'd been caught in a trap of his own making. The carefully constructed narrative about protecting his confused mother had crumbled under the weight of evidence showing his real motivations. Now it was our turn to present our case. Harold called Dr. Peterson first, who testified about my comprehensive evaluation and excellent cognitive functioning. His credentials were impeccable, his assessment methods thorough, and his conclusions unambiguous. In your professional opinion, Dr. Peterson, is Mrs. Walker capable of making rational decisions about her property and finances? Absolutely. She tested in the 95th percentile for cognitive function in her age group. Her memory is excellent, her reasoning is sound, and her judgment is entirely appropriate. I found no evidence of any condition that would impair her decision-making capacity. Did you find any evidence of manipulation or undue influence in her decision to transfer property to her son Marcus? None whatsoever. Mrs. Walker clearly understood the implications of her decision and had sound reasons for making it. Her choice was based on her assessment of which son had demonstrated genuine care and respect for her autonomy. Jennifer Chen testified next, presenting the evidence from her investigation. Photos of Brandon's meetings with Caldwell months before any supposed crisis. Documents showing his financial desperation. Recordings of his conversations coaching people to look for signs of my mental decline. The pattern of behavior we uncovered, Jennifer testified, is consistent with someone planning a calculated attack on his mother's competency, not someone responding to genuine concerns about her welfare. Finally, Harold called me to testify on my own behalf. I walked to the witness stand with my head high, looking directly at Judge Vance as I was sworn in. Mrs. Walker, can you tell the court why you decided to transfer your house to Marcus instead of Brandon? I took a deep breath and began with Brandon's phone call, his demand that I move to Sunset Manor, his cruel comment about taking up space like a ghost nobody wanted to see. I described the family dinner, his public humiliation of me, and my realization that he saw me as an obstacle rather than his mother. I didn't make this decision in anger, Your Honor, though I was certainly angry. I made it in clarity. I realized that I wanted my home to go to the son who wanted me in it, not the son who saw me as inconvenient. Do you understand the financial value of the property you transferred? Yes, Your Honor. It's worth approximately $400,000. But its value to me isn't financial. It's the home where I raised my children, where I lived with my husband for 40 years, where every room holds memories I treasure. I wanted it to go to someone who would understand that value. Are you aware that your decision has created financial hardship for Brandon? I'm aware that Brandon has financial problems, Your Honor, but those problems existed long before I made any decisions about my property. His difficulties are the result of his own choices, not mine. Caldwell's cross-examination was aggressive but ineffective. He tried to confuse me with complex questions about dates and financial details, but my answers were clear and consistent. He suggested that my anger toward Brandon was evidence of impaired judgment, but I calmly explained that anger was a rational response to being treated with disrespect by one's own child. When the testimony concluded, Judge Vance called a brief recess before delivering her ruling. I sat in the hallway with Harold and Marcus, feeling drained but hopeful. We'd presented our case thoroughly, and Brandon's motivations had been clearly exposed. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Vance's expression was stern as she prepared to deliver her decision. This court has reviewed all testimony and evidence presented in this matter. The petition requests that Martha Walker be declared mentally incompetent based on allegations of declining cognitive function and poor judgment regarding financial decisions. She paused, looking directly at Brandon before continuing. However, the evidence presented demonstrates that Mrs. Walker is fully competent to make decisions about her life and property. Dr. Peterson's comprehensive evaluation shows superior cognitive function for her age group, with no signs of any condition that would impair her judgment. I felt Marcus squeeze my hand as Judge Vance continued. More troubling to this court is the evidence suggesting that this petition was motivated not by genuine concern for Mrs. Walker's welfare, but by the petitioner's financial difficulties and desire to gain control of valuable property. The timeline of events, including pre-planning of legal action, advance deposits on institutional care, and systematic documentation of allegedly concerning behavior, suggests a calculated attempt to use the court system to override Mrs. Walker's legitimate property decisions. Brandon's face had gone pale as the judge's words sank in. Therefore, this court denies the petition for guardianship in its entirety. Mrs. Walker retains full control over her person and property. Furthermore, this court finds that the petition was frivolous and filed in bad faith. Judge Vance's gavel came down with finality. Mr. Brandon Walker is hereby ordered to pay all court costs and reasonable attorney fees incurred by the respondent in defending against this action. This court will not tolerate the use of guardianship proceedings to harass competent adults or to circumvent their legitimate property decisions. It was over. I was free, vindicated, and Brandon had been publicly exposed for exactly what he was. A son who'd been willing to destroy his mother's reputation and autonomy for financial gain. As we left the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete peace with my decisions. The family I'd been trying to preserve was gone, but the family I'd chosen to keep was walking beside me in the Georgia sunshine, heading home to the house that would always be ours. 2 months after the court ruling, I was standing in my kitchen making Sunday dinner when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the window, I saw a moving truck parked across the street, and Brandon loading boxes into his sedan. Lisa was directing the movers with sharp gestures, her voice carrying across the neighborhood even though I couldn't make out the words. They were leaving. After 15 years in the house they'd bought to impress the neighbors, Brandon and Lisa were packing up and moving away. Helen Morrison had told me they'd lost the house to foreclosure 2 weeks earlier. The court-ordered attorney fees had been the final straw that broke their already strained finances. I should have felt satisfaction watching them pack their belongings, but instead I felt something closer to sadness. Not for their financial troubles. Those were consequences of choices they'd made, but for the complete destruction of what had once been a family. Marcus found me at the window, watching the scene across the street. "You okay?" "I'm thinking about the little boy who used to help me plant tomatoes in the back garden. Wondering where that child went. He grew up into a man who thought he deserved things he hadn't earned. Maybe I failed him somehow. Maybe I didn't teach him the difference between wanting something and deserving it." Marcus put his arm around my shoulders. "Mama, you taught both of us the same lessons." Brandon chose to ignore them. "That's not your failure." As we watched, Sarah and Jake, Brandon's children with Lisa, came out of the house carrying their own boxes. Sarah was 14 now, old enough to understand that her family was losing their home because of decisions her father had made. She looked embarrassed, angry, hurt in the way teenagers do when their world shifts beneath their feet. "I feel sorry for those kids," I said. "Maybe this will teach them something their father never learned about the consequences of treating people badly." An hour later, as I was setting the table for dinner, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah standing on my front porch, shifting nervously from foot to foot. She was alone. I opened the door. "Hello, sweetheart." "Hi, Grandma Martha. Could I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course. Come in." We sat in the living room, where so many difficult conversations had taken place over the past months. Sarah looked older than her 14 years, worn down by whatever family drama she'd been living through. "I wanted to apologize," she said without preamble. "For what?" "For what Dad did. For the lies Mom told in court. For the way they've been talking about you. My heart broke a little for this girl who felt responsible for her parents' choices. Sarah, honey, you don't owe me any apologies. You didn't do anything wrong. But I knew they were lying. When Mom said you repeated stories and left the stove on, I knew it wasn't true. I've been here lots of times, and you never did any of those things. Why didn't you say anything? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Because they're my parents. Because I was scared of what would happen if I contradicted them. Because I thought maybe if Dad got what he wanted, everything would go back to normal. And now I know there was never going to be a normal. Dad was always angry about something. Always planning the next thing that would make him happy. The house, more money, a bigger car. It was never enough. I moved to sit beside her on the sofa, the way I used to when she was small and needed comfort after a skinned knee or a bad dream. Sarah, can I tell you something important? She nodded. Your father's choices don't define you. His anger, his greed, his willingness to hurt people to get what he wants. None of that is who you are or who you have to become. But what if I'm like him? What if I grow up to be someone who hurts people I'm supposed to love? That's a choice you'll make every day for the rest of your life. And based on the fact that you're here apologizing for things you didn't do, I think you're already choosing to be better than that. We talked for another 20 minutes about school, about her plans for high school, about the uncertainty of moving to a new place and starting over. When she got up to leave, she hugged me tightly. Will you stay in touch with me? Even though Dad and I probably won't see each other anymore. Always, you'll always be my granddaughter. No matter what happens between the adults in this family. After Sarah left, I sat in the gathering dusk, thinking about second chances, and the long arc of family relationships. Maybe Brandon was lost to me forever, but his daughter wasn't. Maybe some good could come from this destruction after all. The weeks that followed brought an unexpected peace to my life. Without the constant stress of Brandon's pressure and manipulation, I found myself rediscovering simple pleasures I'd forgotten. I started painting watercolors again, something I hadn't done since Thomas died. I joined a book club at the library. I volunteered to read to children at the local elementary school. Marcus moved into the guest bedroom temporarily while he saved money to renovate the basement into his own apartment. Having him in the house felt natural, comfortable. We established routines that worked for both of us. Coffee together in the mornings, dinner together 3 nights a week, and mutual respect for each other's need for privacy and independence. This is how it should have been all along. I told him one evening as we worked in the garden together, planting bulbs that would bloom next spring. What do you mean? Family helping family without keeping score. People live together because they want to, not because they have to, or because they're waiting for something to happen. Marcus straightened up, wiping dirt from his hands. Do you ever regret it? The house transfer, the court battle, cutting ties with Brandon. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Brandon chose to see me as an enemy instead of his mother, but I don't regret standing up for myself. Even though it cost you a son. Marcus, I lost Brandon long before the court case. I just finally stopped pretending I hadn't. 3 months later, I received an unexpected phone call from Rebecca, Brandon's daughter from his first marriage. She was calling from Seattle with news that changed everything. Grandma Martha, I wanted you to know that I'm getting married next month. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Tell me about him. She talked for 10 minutes about David, her fiancé, a software engineer who shared her love of hiking and cooking. They'd been together for 2 years and had bought a small house near the mountains where they planned to start their life together. There's something else, Rebecca said. I wanted to ask if you and Uncle Marcus would come to the wedding. Of course we will. We'd be honored. There's more. I know this might be awkward, but I've decided not to invite Dad. The words hung in the air between us. Rebecca, that's a big decision. Are you sure? I'm sure. He's never really been a father to me, not the way Uncle Marcus has been. He missed my college graduation because he was busy with work. He's never met David, even though I've been with him for 2 years. And after what he tried to do to you, honey, I don't want to be the reason you cut ties with your father. You're not the reason. He is. The way he treated you just showed me clearly what I'd been trying to ignore for years. He only cares about people when they can give him something he wants. Have you told him? I sent him a letter last week. He called and tried to convince me I was making a mistake, that family feuds shouldn't interfere with important occasions. I told him that treating your mother the way he treated you was what interfered with important occasions. Rebecca's wedding was beautiful. A small ceremony in a park overlooking Puget Sound, with about 50 guests who clearly loved the couple. Marcus walked Rebecca down the aisle, his face glowing with pride and emotion. I sat in the front row wearing the blue dress I'd bought for the occasion, feeling grateful to be included in this celebration of love and new beginnings. During the reception, Rebecca pulled me aside for a private moment. Thank you for coming, Grandma Martha. Having you here means everything to me. Thank you for including us, for choosing to build your own family based on love instead of obligation. I learned that from watching you. From seeing how you stood up for yourself when everyone expected you to just accept being treated badly. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to pretend that unacceptable behavior is acceptable. That's exactly what I'm doing with Dad. I'm done pretending that his neglect and selfishness are normal father behavior. As I watched Rebecca dance with her new husband, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her happiness, I felt a deep sense of completion. This was what family was supposed to look like. People choosing to love and support each other, not people trapped by blood relationships that had become toxic. The flight home to Georgia gave me time to reflect on how much my life had changed in the past year. I'd gone from being a widow, afraid of being a burden, to being a woman confident in her choices and surrounded by people who valued her for who she was, not what she could give them. Marcus met me at the airport with a surprise. He'd spent the weekend installing a new bathroom in the basement apartment, making it fully functional for his move downstairs. I wanted it to be ready when you got back, he said, as he gave me the tour. My own space, but still close enough that we can help each other when needed. The apartment was perfect. A bedroom, sitting area, kitchenette, and the new bathroom. Marcus had decorated it simply but warmly, with books lining the shelves and photos of our family on the walls. Are you sure you want to live in the basement? I asked. I'm sure I want to live here, with you, in this house that holds our family's best memories. The basement is just where my bedroom happens to be. That evening, we sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The neighborhood was quiet except for the sound of children playing in a yard, down the street, and the distant hum of traffic on the main road. Marcus, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think Brandon will ever understand what he lost when he chose money over family? Marcus considered the question for a long time. I think he'll understand what he lost. I'm not sure he'll ever understand that it was his choice to lose it. What do you mean? I think he'll always see himself as the victim of your unreasonable decision, instead of the architect of his own exile. Some people never learn to take responsibility for the consequences of their actions. A year later, I received a letter addressed in handwriting I hadn't seen in months. Brandon's return address was from an apartment complex in a town 2 hours away. Inside, 3 pages of what amounted to a half-hearted apology mixed with justification for his behavior. He wrote about financial stress, about feeling like he'd never measured up to my expectations, about the pressure of supporting a family and maintaining appearances. He claimed he'd only wanted to protect me from making decisions I might regret later. The letter ended with a request to put the past behind us and rebuild our relationship for the sake of family. I read it twice, then filed it away in a drawer with other documents I needed to keep, but didn't need to dwell on. Brandon still didn't understand that protecting me would have meant supporting my choices, not trying to override them. He still saw the problem as my unreasonable reaction to his reasonable concerns. Marcus found me in the kitchen an hour later, staring out the window at the garden where the spring bulbs we'd planted were just beginning to break through the soil. The letter from Brandon? How did you know? You get that particular expression when you're thinking about things that can't be fixed. He wants to reconcile. He says he's learned from his mistakes and wants to be a family again. What do you think? I think some bridges can't be rebuilt once they've been burned. I think trust, once broken the way Brandon broke it, doesn't just magically repair itself because someone writes a letter. So you won't respond? I might, but not to accept his offer of reconciliation. To explain one final time why there can't be one, I spent the evening writing my own letter, choosing each word carefully. I told Brandon that I wished him well, that I hoped he'd learned something from the experience, but that our relationship had been permanently damaged by his choices. I explained that trust was like a piece of fine china. Once shattered, you might be able to glue the pieces back together, but it would never again be strong enough to hold the weight of what mattered most. I told him about Rebecca's wedding, about Sarah's visit, about the ways his children were choosing to build their own definitions of family based on respect and genuine care, rather than manipulation and obligation. I ended the letter with a truth I'd learned over the past year. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their bad behavior by pretending it's acceptable. I love the little boy you used to be, Brandon, but I can't have a relationship with the man you chose to become. I mailed the letter the next morning and felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. This was truly the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Now, as I write this story, it's been 3 years since that first phone call when Brandon told me I was taking up too much space. I'm still in my house, still making my own decisions, still surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can give them. Marcus finished his basement apartment and has been living there happily. We've developed a rhythm that works perfectly for both of us. Independent but connected, helpful but not intrusive. The house feels alive again, filled with conversation and laughter, and the kind of easy companionship that comes from people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. Sarah visits during school breaks, staying in her old room and helping me with projects around the house. She's grown into a thoughtful young woman who's learned early in life to distinguish between people who claim to love you and people who actually do. Rebecca calls every few weeks from Seattle, sharing news about her marriage and her new job, and the small joys of building a life with someone who truly loves her. She and David are planning to visit this summer, and I'm already preparing the guest room. I never heard from Brandon again after my final letter. Sarah tells me he moved to Florida and started over with a new business venture. She has no contact with him, a decision she made for her own peace of mind. The house that Brandon once claimed I was taking up too much space in is now full of the right kind of space. Space for love without conditions, space for family chosen rather than just inherited, space for the kind of life Thomas and I always dreamed of living here. Sometimes I stand in the garden among the roses Thomas planted, and the vegetables Marcus and I grow together, and I think about the journey that brought me to this point. It wasn't the path I would have chosen when Thomas died and left me alone in this big house, but it was the path that led me to discover my own strength, to understand the difference between being alone and being lonely, and to create the kind of family that sustains rather than drains. Brandon was wrong about one thing. I wasn't taking up too much space. I was finally, for the first time in years, taking up exactly the right amount of space. Space for a woman who'd learned to value herself as much as she valued others. Space for a mother who'd discovered that love without respect isn't love at all. Space for a family built on choice rather than obligation. And in this space, surrounded by people who celebrate rather than resent my presence, I've found something Brandon's money and manipulation could never have bought. True peace, real security, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that I stood up for myself when it mattered most. The house is still here. I'm still here, and the space I occupy is mine to give to those who deserve it, not to those who demand it. That's the difference Brandon never understood. And it's the lesson that saved my life. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.